Okay, this will be video 2 for January 31st for APUSH. So we just finished Treaty of Versailles terms. New countries are formed with self-determination. These countries are all going to be forced to sign Treaty of Versailles, and Germany has to pay high payback. Before I go on to how we ratify the treaty at home, what you need to understand is that think about what's going to happen to Germany because of the Treaty of Versailles. What's the repercussions of this? If you have to sign this and deal with this, and you have to pay $30 billion for what happened during the war, there's no way you can do this. There's no way basically you can handle this. And so Germany is going to be in a very bad situation as a result of this treaty. Their economy's in shambles. They've had all kinds of war and destruction. No one's there to help them fund rebuilding. You take away colonies, you take away land, so they're going to lose money and revenue as a society as well too. So point here is that Germany is going to have a terrible condition to go into, hyperinflation problems with their economy, a lot of resentful people, high unemployment, a lot of soldiers and workers unemployed, and so that's going to basically lead towards the development of like the Nazi Party and Hitler, because a lack of compassion, lack of help for Germany once the war is over with. And we'll talk about this more later on, but you got to understand how the Treaty of Versailles is in a lot of ways directly responsible for the lead up to World War II and the creation of Nazis and Hitler and everything else, because Germany was just left to basically rot and nothing was done to help them out. All right, so let's talk about the ratification back home, because if you recall from civics or GOPO, the president can make a treaty, but you got to have Congress approve it, in this case specifically the Senate. So on that note, Wilson has an uphill battle to fight because Republicans have taken over taken over the Senate since the last election. So in 1918, the midterm election, Wilson goes out and campaigns on behalf of Democrats, saying that you need to vote Democrat because it's the patriotic thing to do. Because the war was going on, it was helped developed by Wilson, who's Democrat, and Democrats in general. He basically makes Americans think that, oh, you need to vote Democrat. It's the only patriotic thing to do. And so that kind of backfires. Also, people don't like the fact that Wilson was gone so much during World War I and was leaving the country. They felt like you should be president of the United States and not, off and gallivanting here and there. So it backfired a little bit on Wilson, and so Republicans end up taking control of the Senate in 1919, which is going to hurt him for the ratification process for this treaty. He needs 2/3 of the Senate's approval to push the treaty through. Republicans didn't like it because they believed it would obligate America to intervene in foreign affairs. This is very key. When the war ends, Americans, and Republicans especially, want us to go back into a state of isolationism. So Republicans and a lot of Americans want us to go back into a state of isolationism. They don't want us to get tied up and involved in foreign affairs and influenced by these other countries. They believe if we do this or we join this, we're going to be persuaded to get involved in more foreign affairs. And it goes back to like breaking George Washington's ideas about what we should do. Like, we don't want to get involved in European affairs on a permanent basis. So Republicans didn't like the treaty because it got us too much involved in foreign affairs, especially the League of Nations. It also might interfere with the Monroe Doctrine. So the other fear was that it might also interfere with the Monroe Doctrine. So increased partisanship has occurred because of the war. Like we said, Republicans take over because of what Wilson asked of the country, and it got a lot of Republicans in office. So you have a very Republican Senate led by Henry Cabot Lodge. Don't forget about him, Henry Cabot Lodge. Cabot spelled C-A-B-O-T, Cabot, and then Lodge spelled like Lodge, L-O-D-G-E. So Henry Cabot Lodge was your chief senator, or the Senate Majority Leader at this point, who's leading the opposition against this treaty. And so it's an uphill battle against Lodge, what Wilson has, and Republicans have a solid majority in both chambers of Congress at this point. Okay, so the opponents. There's actually two inner groups of Republicans, two groups who see the treaty different ways. You don't have to know this for the test or anything, but I'll give you their names real quick. It's the Irreconcilables and the Reservationists. Irreconcilables and the Reservationists are the two Republican factions that view this treaty. The Irreconcilables are like, we're not going to accept this treaty in any way, shape, or form. It's bad. The whole thing's bad. We're not going to take it at all. So the Irreconcilables were the minority, but they said, we're not going to take the treaty at all with the League at all, in any kind of way. It's bad. Most of the Republicans were reservationists. Lodge was part of this. They had certain reservations about the treaty. They wanted to add stuff to it, and they wanted to not get us involved in League of Nations. They wanted to remove the League of Nations part and tweak it a little bit, and Wilson would not compromise. Wilson was like, no, we worked too hard on this. It is what it is. We're not going to change it. So Wilson refuses to compromise on the treaty. So after meeting a brick wall with the Republicans in office, Wilson does what he's done in the past. He's like, all right, if they're not anything about it, I'm going to go out to the people and try to get them to intervene here. And I have a political cartoon here. I don't know how well you can see it, but you have a little cartoon with two men, say the Senate and the House, and then here's Wilson walking out the door with the League of Nations in his hands, and the door says American people. So he's trying to take his case to the American people and trying to convince them to convince Congress to pass this thing. So the problem is that Wilson does this in August, September of 1919, just returning from a months-long trip to Europe where he had been sick while there, so his body wasn't fully recovered. And now he's going to go like on a month-long tour, traveling by train, city to city, giving multiple speeches a day, trying to convince Americans to pass this treaty. So he's basically wearing himself out. A lot of stress, wearing himself out, and he's also still kind of recovering from being sick while in Europe too. So in mid-September, after going on for weeks and weeks giving these speeches, right before he gives one of his speeches, he falls over and has a stroke. So Wilson in mid-September of 1919 has a stroke. Does not die, but has a stroke from all the stress on his body. And is basically an invalid for the next 3 to 4 months. So he's brought back to the White House, bedridden, can't do a whole lot, which that's all the prime time that they're discussing this treaty that he can't do anything about at this point. He will eventually recover. He won't be the same man that he once was, but he'll recover, and he will finish his term out. So he'll finish out his term all the way to 1921. But while that time he was in bedridden and couldn't do a whole lot, his wife took care of him. And she realized the kind of power and influence she had, so what she did was she said that only she could go talk to him, and then only she would relay messages to people. So she would go in the bedroom, talk to him, and come out and give his messages out to people. So a lot of folks think that it might have been her actually calling these shots. So you might have had like the first kind of woman president in this situation while he was bedridden and couldn't do a whole lot after the stroke. So anyway, long story short, and this is the rejection of the treaty, they'll try to pass the treaty twice in the Senate, and it fails both times. So Wilson's not there to fight for it. The whole tour of the train thing fell apart. So we never signed the Treaty of Versailles. A couple of years later, we'll make our own treaty with Germany and sign it separately. We never demand a bunch of reparations from Germany, and we never joined the League of Nations either. So ironically, Wilson's baby that he helped create, while it is going to be made and created in Europe, we never actually end up joining or signing or becoming part of the League of Nations. We do send a representative there, but they have no voting power. So, the League of Nations will be not as effective since America doesn't want to be involved. So, before I move on, what you want to be aware of, and again, write this down, is that after World War I, America wants to retreat into isolationism. And so that's the outcome of all this. We don't join the League of Nations, we reject the Treaty of Versailles, and we will try to retreat back in isolationism, being uninvolved in foreign affairs. Okay? So now we're going to switch out of World War I material and go into Chapter 31 stuff, which is going to be going into the 1920s. Start looking at the political and cultural aspects of the 1920s. The first thing we're going to address is like the immediate post-war conflicts and issues. There's a lot of issues in 1919. 1919 was one of those few years where a lot of turmoil was happening in the country, politically, economically, socially, all across the country. So Americans have to come back home and adjust to normal life again with all their wartime patriotic fever and all the post-war stresses. So first thing is demobilization. Demobilization refers to the fact that now factories have to reconvert back to consumer goods, and you have 4 million soldiers coming back from the war who now have to go find jobs. Like basically they're done with the military, and now they got to go find jobs instead. So during World War I, 4 million men had been suddenly taken away from civilian life, and now they're brought back home and they're out of uniform. Now they got to go back and find a job somewhere and find work. And there's no program, no transition made for these people by the government. They're just like, all right, we're done. Good luck. They go back and they try to make new life for themselves, hopefully find a job somewhere. A lot of those African Americans and other minorities and women who took up jobs had to give them up. So a lot of those cities north, south, or wherever, they had to give a lot of those African Americans, minorities, women had to give those jobs up because the demand is gone, and they're going to prefer having white males there instead. The business boom of World War I also goes flat. So before the war and during the war, we had a lot of selling, a lot of prosperity, but that all goes flat because now the demand is gone for war goods. So there's also some layoffs. There's also a reduction in working staff in general. So that does mean that we're going to enter into a brief recession. So for the first year and a half or so after the war, America enters a recession because essentially there's not enough consumer goods. People have money, people want to buy stuff, but there's not enough consumer goods to go around. So we do go into a brief recession after the war. Consumers went out on buying sprees to buy whatever they could, but that led to inflation. With a short amount of goods available and people go out and buying stuff now that conserving and rationing are all done, it leads to higher inflation. And you don't really see a boom with the economy take place until like late 20, early 1921. So unemployment you're going to have unemployment kind of struggle, about 10%. Recession is going to be going on for a couple of years until they can kind of get back to normal. But there's going to be a rough transition out of the war for the economy. So we're going to stop the second video there.